Hey guys, we're going to start talking about distance and midpoint. So, we're going to look at this in a couple of different ways, but the first way we're going to look at that is on a number line. So, the key points here, so when you end this lesson, you want to be able to calculate the distance between 2 points on a number line, and you also want to identify the midpoint between 2 points on a number line. The main thing I want you to make sure that you notice is that the midpoint is going to be a location. So it's going to be a location on the number line where the distance is going to actually just be a physical number. So what's the space in between? So the main thing is that you understand is that the midpoint is going to be a location on the number line, whereas the distance is going to be the space between the 2 points. Okay. Here is our two formulas here. So we have D is equal to the absolute value of the two endpoints subtracted from each other is essentially what this says. So I'm going to take some number and I'm x2 is what we're calling it, and then minus x1. Take the absolute value. Now, you're always going to take the absolute value because distance is always positive. And so, just like you don't want someone to say, or you don't hear anyone say, I ran 2 miles out and then negative 2 miles back. No, they ran 2 miles out and 2 miles back, which would give you 4 miles. So, it's always going to be positive. And then for the midpoint, we're going to take the two endpoints and we're going to add them and then divide by 2. So basically what's going to happen is you're taking the average here is essentially. So you're finding where do those two meet in the middle. Okay, so the first example here that we're going to look at now is we're going to find the distance between AE, or what's the distance or the length of line segment AE. So that's how we can also note that as well. That little line on top, that means line segment AE. So from A to E here, we have the absolute value of, I'm going to start with the bigger one, 8 minus negative 3. You can also count on the number line. 1, 2. Now, if you start getting really large numbers, that might not be as easy. And in the challenge question, you can't really count either. So just keep that in mind. So I have 8 minus negative 3, which ends up being 11. And the absolute value means you're always going to keep the positive piece of that. So it's just going to be 11. So what's the space in between A and E? That's 11. Now we're going to look at DB. So from D to B. And so that's going to be the absolute value of negative 9 minus 5. So negative 9 is where D is, 5 is B. This is the length of segment DB. And so therefore that's going to give me negative 14, but we're taking the absolute value of that, which means that the distance between those two is going to be 14. And then we're looking at CA. So from A to C or C to A doesn't matter really. So I'm going to have the absolute value of 2 minus negative 3. So that distance there is going to be the absolute value of 5, always positive. So the space between those two, 5, or the length of that segment is going to be 5. And then lastly, we have EB. And so from E to B, is right here, super close. So we have 8 minus 5. So I'm starting with the right. Doesn't matter. This is a line segment here. This is the absolute value of 3. Since distance is always positive with absolute value, it's going to be 3. So the length of EB is 3. We could also talk about that. The space in between those two is 3 on the number line. Now, example 2, we're going to look at the midpoint for these two. So I'm going to take the two endpoints, I'm going to add them and then divide by 2. So the midpoint for segment CD, I'm going to take the first endpoint, doesn't matter where you start, and then I'll add the second endpoint. So -9 plus 2 divide by 2. That's going to give me -7 divided by 2, which is -3.5. So you're saying, hold up, I thought you said distance is always positive. Distance always is. This is midpoint. It's a location on the number line. So the location on the number line is going to be about right here. And you can see that this distance is the same as this distance. Okay, so that's why we can have a negative midpoint, but not a negative distance. All right, and now we're going to find the midpoint for segment A, B. So we have -3 and 5. So I have -3 plus 5 divided by 2. That gives me 2 divided by 2, and that is 1. So on the number line, we're looking at the location 1 on the number line. So midpoint is a location, distance is that space in between. And then EA. So from E to A, we have, let me erase all this stuff. See, 8 to -3. So either way, so 8 plus -3 or -3 plus 8, either way. So I end up with 5 divided by 2, which is 2.5. So 2.5 roughly in this area, which is about halfway. If you ended up with a number like, I don't know, for that one, maybe it's -5 or maybe it was 0, and you can literally see that that cannot be the case. So just double check your work with that if it's at all possible. All right, the third example says if the midpoint for two endpoints on the number line is -6 and the distance between the endpoints is 18, what's the location of the endpoints on the number line? So there's no picture here, so that one makes this one a little bit more challenging. So let's map this out a little bit so we have a little bit better idea of what it looks like in our head. So we know that the midpoint is -6. So somewhere is over here is -6. Up here is 0. I don't know exactly where. Okay. And I know that this is the midpoint. The distance between the two endpoints is 18. So we're using both distance and midpoint in this problem here. And there's no picture. So the distance is 18. Remember, we're finding the midpoint is halfway in between. So if I take my distance at 18, then halfway in between of that is going to be my midpoint. So if I take 18 and I divide it by 2, I'm going to get 9. So I know that there's going to be 9 on this side, and there's going to be 9 on this side. I'm trying to figure out where are these 2 points right here. So if I take -6 plus 9 and going to the right, that's going to give me a 3. And if I take -6 minus 9, that moves it to the left, then I'm going to end up with -17. Okay, so these are my two answers, -17 and 3 are going to be the endpoints there. So that one's a little bit trickier. Your challenge question is a little bit tricky as well because there is 2 questions there, even though there's only 1 question mark. Whoops. So there's 2 questions there. You're trying to find the distance between M and N and the distance between M and the midpoint of LN. So just a lot of stuff going on there. Distance and midpoint. Distance is always positive. Midpoint is always the location. And that's what I was just kind of wrapping up really quickly. Try that challenge problem. And if it works out for you and you're ready to go on to your skill check. If not, practice with Book It or quizzes first before moving on to that skill check there.